I've gone ahead and saved the results of the last exercises, Emboss versus SSMB.psd, found inside the 15 Sharpen folder. And I'm doing this so that you can look at this file on your own screen, if you want to, as opposed to here in the video. Because even though we got rid of all that color saturation in the Emboss overlay layer, we're still getting some different colors out of this effect than we were with SS Motion Blur. And I actually prefer the colors that are going on inside the SS Motion Blur effect, even though we have more noise inside that version of the image. So again, it's going to vary from one image to the other, and you can decide which path to take. Anyway, I'm going to switch over here now to ReadyForHighPass.psd, which is another variation on this squirrels image right here. And what we've got going is an advanced 70% layer. You may recall that's the application of Smart Sharpen using the advanced settings that required a little bit of work and then backing off the opacity to 70%. Now I'm going to show you how to avoid clipping. If clipping is an issue for you, that is highlight and shadow clipping, how to avoid that clipping using high pass. And high pass ends up having a little bit more of a delicate touch where sharpening is concerned. It's not a super intuitive filter for this purpose, but once you get the hang of it, I think you can make it work. It's really ideal for portrait shots, as well as these squirrels here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off advanced 70%. And basically what I have going here is two versions of the original image, one in the background layer and then one on this high pass layer. So they're the exact same non-sharpened version of that image. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that we can take in more detail here. And I'll go up to the filter menu. I'll choose other, and I'll choose this command right there, high pass. And notice if you load a D keys, I've given it a keyboard shortcut because I use this one a lot. I don't use Emboss that often, but I do use high pass all the time. Shift F10. Go ahead and choose that command in order to bring up what has to be just absolutely the ugliest filter ever. It just turns the entire image gray. It doesn't even bother to try to create some kind of cool effect the way Emboss does. It just makes the image all gray. And the edges are there hanging on for dear life. So what's going on is that all the non-edges in the image are turning gray. And then the edge details have little halos popping off of them, but we're actually seeing less in the way of the edges than we were before we even applied the command. So if I go ahead and turn preview off, you'll see that those edges were a lot stronger before I apply the filter. And then if I turn the filter back on, you can see that they're really going away. Well, what's happening is the edges really are hanging on. So you can imagine that we're taking all of the detail inside this image and sifting it through a funnel, let's say. And all the non-edges are going down to the bottom of the funnel. They're just running into this gray world here. And then the edges are hanging on to the sides. This is a strange thing. If you increase the radius value, you get less of a detrimental effect out of this filter, whereas if you decrease the radius, then you get more of an effect out of this filter. You get rid of more and more colors, and you have fewer edges hanging on there. Well, what you want to do with the radius value is account for your output. So in other words, if you're outputting for screen, you want to keep this value very low. And the same rules that apply to unsharp mask apply here in high pass as well. So 0.3 to 0.5 is going to work out well for screen images, even though it doesn't look like it's going to work at all. It will, so you just have to trust it. And you'll gain experience over time if you decide to work this way. For print, you want to raise that value to something in the neighborhood of 3 pixels, for example. So 1 pixel worth of radius for every 100 pixels per inch of resolution. You may recall, just so that we're getting a decent comparison here, I applied a radius value of 4 pixels with lens blur inside the Smart Sharpen dialog box. And I was telling you that when you're using lens blur, you have to increase your radius value to about half again what it was before. So I'm going to take my radius value down to 2.5. That's not exactly the right math, but it'll work out well enough here. So 2.5, click OK. Now, what do we do about all these grays inside the image? How do we keep the highlights and the shadows and burn them into place and get rid of the grays? Well, the same way that we did exactly that same thing with the emboss effect. That is, we apply one of the contrast blend modes, starting with, incidentally, overlay. And notice that just goes ahead and drops out all those grays. We keep the highlights and the shadows, and we get what is ultimately a very nice sharpening effect. So this is the original version of the squirrels if I turn that layer off. And this is the high pass version of the squirrels right there. And let's go ahead and compare that to what we were able to achieve using Smart Sharpen. This is the Smart Sharpen effect. And we had to go through all those hoops, right? We had to apply those advanced settings that don't make a ton of sense. And then we had to reduce the opacity to 70%. And we had to apply an amount value while there was no amount value associated with high pass. So we just got some decent results right off the bat. Now, if you look closely at this image, you will see that there is something of a difference. I'll go ahead and zoom in on the fur. Notice that we do have some wandering color problems here inside of the squirrel's fur, even though we went ahead and applied our modification. That is, we applied Smart Sharpen just to the luminance data. But if I turn off that advanced 70% layer, you can see that we've got a lot of color going on with high pass as well, for the exact same reason that we had weird colors coming out of the emboss filter, because there are some colors still at work in that high pass layer. And if we want to get rid of them, then this time we won't switch back to normal and all that jazz. We'll just leave high pass set to overlay. Go ahead and make sure that layer is active. Then I want you to watch these colors inside the fur. Go up to the image menu, choose adjustments, and that ends up covering up a lot of those fur details, but still. Then I'll go down here to desaturate, choose that command, and you'll notice that a lot of those colors go away. So this is before. We have all kinds of weird colors going on inside of the fur here. And this is after I apply desaturate. So there are still some aberrant colors at work, but that's just because we're exaggerating the color distinctions that were already there. Anyway, that's what you do. I'll go ahead and zoom out. Now let's say that you want to increase the intensity of this sharpening effect. Why, then you can switch from overlay to one of two other modes. You can either take it up a notch by moving up to hard light, and that'll give you a more pronounced effect. Let's go and zoom in to 100% so we can see that. So this is the result of overlay, like so, and then this is the result of hard light. And I'm showing you the difference just by pressing Control-Z or Command-Z on a Mac. And then if you really want to up the ante, you switch from hard light, go ahead and skip this guy, and switch to linear light, like so. And then you're going to get a very pronounced effect out of the filter. And you can always modify the opacity value if you want to. Now, if overlay's too much, you can reduce the opacity, or you can also try switching to soft light. Now, soft light is not just a lower opacity version of overlay, but it does provide a more nuanced effect. So I'll go ahead and choose soft light, and then if I turn off high pass, this is the original version of the image. This is the ever so slightly sharpened version of the image. So not all that different, but still. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and switch back to overlay here. And the other thing to note, where the differences between these variations are concerned, if I go ahead and turn advanced 70% back on, not only do we have a stronger effect inside of the fur, notice that. So this is advanced 70% applied using the Smart Sharpen filter. This is the high pass variation, which notice doesn't have any clipping going on, so we're not clipping the heck out of the highlights and shadows here. Also, however, notice that we're retaining the whiskers quite nicely, so we didn't have to sacrifice the whisker detail with high pass where we did with those advanced settings here at 70%. So there are some differences going on. Notice that the whiskers are a little more pronounced, or at least they would be if we were to switch to a different blend mode. Let's go ahead and knock this up from overlay to hard light. And see there, we get the whisker detail back. We're still not clipping the highlights or the shadows. And now notice the difference here with advanced 70%. That's what I was hoping to show you right there. That goes ahead and clips out the whiskers because of those advanced modifications we made. Whereas with high pass, we still get that whisker detail. So if you're really interested in avoiding clipping where sharpening is concerned, and this is very useful for portrait sharpening, why then high pass tends to be the better way to go. High pass with whatever radius value you would normally apply using unsharp mask, and then go ahead and set that layer to one of the contrast modes, whether it be overlay, hard light, or linear light.